These Inner Temple Movers and Returners podcasts are part of a profession-wide effort to retain talent and support the progression of all groups at the bar. Supporting career breaks and returners and those who are seeking to move between the practice areas is a vital way of encouraging diversity, equality and inclusion at the bar. You will hear from a range of hosts and various guests who will be sharing their experience, giving you opportunities and suggested guidance for all those seeking to move, return or manage their career break during practice.
Welcome back to the Movers and Returners podcast series, part 4, with me, Sunyana Sharma, your host today. In our last podcast, we discussed the journeys of movers and returners to the bar for those with caring responsibilities, from managing your pregnancy, parental leave, and the phased return to work. We know, however, that not all events can be pre-planned. Today's podcast looks at the unexpected events that can force us to leave the bar. Whether it is illness, burnout, or bereavement, managing a short-term or even long-term hiatus from practice at sometimes very short notice can add a very different dimension to the experience of movers and returners. I'm very excited to welcome my 3 panellists today who require no introduction. Steve Broach KC of 39 Essex Chambers and one of the founding members of BLEMI, barristers with lived experience of mental illness. Stuart Pringle, one of 6 Chambers directors of 3PB Barristers, which boasts a membership of over 250 barristers. And finally, Sam Mercer, Head of Policy, Equality and Diversity and Corporate Social Responsibility at the Bar Council, who has led the way for some of the most high-profile Bar Council initiatives. First of all, can I just say I feel very honoured to have you all here with me today and to help our listeners understand how to navigate those unexpected events in lives. Steve, can I start with you, please? I understand that you've experienced 3 unexpected events in your career at the bar, which has meant that you've become both a mover and a returner. Tell us a bit about your story.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much, first of all, for having me here today. I was called to the bar in 2008, a little later than some people. I had a previous career in the voluntary sector as a campaigner. So I came to the bar and did pupillage when I was 30. And all through my childhood, young adult life, I've been well and have been able to study and work full-time and did that at the bar and threw myself into practice and hugely enjoyed the work that I was doing. But I think it's fair to say, with the benefit of hindsight, didn't do the best job of looking after myself physically. My physical health deteriorated and, as it turned out, my mental health as well. So about 5-6 years into practice, I experienced what is probably best described as a burnout, in that it was a fairly sudden collapse. I had experienced rising anxiety levels in the weeks and months leading up to the point where I could no longer work. But I hadn't anticipated that I was going to be unable to practice very quickly, and I didn't really know what was happening. It was very scary. It's not something I'd experienced previously. I didn't feel I could identify what was wrong. But I lost really the ability to function completely and spent a lot of time in bed, lost a lot of weight and certainly wasn't able to work, but really wasn't able to function as an adult in society. It was very challenging. Had a young family at the time. So that period, my first period, took me out for almost a year. I came back to practice in 2015. Having thought at the time that it all happened, that I'd never work as a barrister again. But the recovery was fairly quick as well. And I did go back very successfully into practice, really very quickly, without feeling like anything had particularly changed. And that was probably not ideal with the benefit of hindsight, because I then had 2 further episodes where I lost capacity to function again and was unable to work for slightly shorter periods on those occasions, thankfully. So that in total, I lost 2 years of my practicing life to these periods of ill health, none of which was planned, wasn't predicted. So it was very challenging. Thankfully, the last of those was in 2019, and since then I've been well and been able to sustain practice. But they were certainly very difficult times, very scary times, and I think something that is perhaps more common at the bar than people recognise and talk about.
It'd be really helpful to understand how did you manage, first of all, the leaving, the moving away? Because obviously it's all very sudden, it happens very quickly. How did that come into effect for you with all the cases in your diary and the things that you had to do?
So leaving without any opportunity to plan is obviously far from ideal. One of the great strengths of our profession, of course, is our clerks. And I think relying on your clerks in the situation where you're suddenly unable to work has to be the right thing to do. Having that relationship in advance, of course, you hope. But my experience has been that wherever I've been, and I've been at 3 sets of chambers, whenever there's been difficulty, my clerks have been willing and able to help. And they've seen it all before, it turns out. I don't think there's much that can be new to an experienced team of clerks at the bar. And that partnership did and can get you through those difficult times. Instructing solicitors generally were very understanding. We weren't really able to say the first time it happened what was going on, because we didn't know. But they were understanding that I was unwell, wasn't able to work. And one of the things you learn very quickly in those situations is that none of us are indispensable as we think we are. Mm-hmm. And other people can cover your work if you're not available without it being a catastrophe most of the time. My practice generally involves much shorter cases. And so although there were some cases where I was mid-instruction, I wasn't literally mid-trial. And I was able to return everything. And I don't think my clients suffered any real detriment at all. Of course, there's a real problem for you as a self-employed person in that your earnings suddenly stop.
Of course.
And so having financial protection and preparation to be able to deal with that is vital. But in terms of managing your professional responsibilities and your obligations to your clients, it can be done as long as you have that effective partnership with your clerks.
You've returned now 3 times. What have you learned about managing that return to practice? What's worked for you to enable you to become a successful barrister and now a silk?
I think the most important thing is to recognise that you may not be the best judge of your own situation, and to be willing and to be humble enough to take advice from the people around you, including senior staff in chambers, your family, colleagues that you trust, to not rush back to work if you've had an illness or a burnout like I experienced, and to make sure that when you do return to work, you do it in a sustainable way so you don't rush straight back to full-time practice if you can afford not to. I also needed to make some lifestyle changes. Personally, for me, moving out of London was a major benefit in terms of having a quieter and a more supportive environment to be in, physical environment to be in. Post-COVID, that seems to be much more achievable for people. And that's been a real benefit for me in terms of working at home much more, spending more time around my family, being able to be more flexible about when I work, not doing such long days in chambers as I used to do. So it's about recognising that we are all human beings with limitations. And if you have experienced a response to the stress of the bar that means that you've been unwell in some way, that doesn't mean you can't be a barrister, but it means that you have to manage yourself and manage your practice rather more carefully than perhaps you might have done beforehand.
And I think the way I see it in my life is I have certain stones, things that are immovable that I have to do in my life, and there'll be sand, so things that can move around. So things like exercise for me enables me to manage that sort of mental health side of things. But you're absolutely right. These things are really important, and I think we take them for granted, especially when we get busy.
Absolutely.
So you're one of the founding members of an organisation called BLEMI. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did it come about? What does it do?
So BLEMI is Barristers with Lived Experience of Mental Illness. And when I came back to practice, I discovered there wasn't an association for barristers who identified as having had a lived experience of mental illness in their lives. And I felt that was something we needed to correct, and that it was really important that amongst all the excellent equality work that's going on with the Bar Council, there was a group for people who had that experience in their lives, whether it was a current mental illness or something they'd experienced in the past. What's been wonderful is that since we launched, we've now got dozens of members in heavily inverted commas, i.e. people that have signed up to our emails and who are on our WhatsApp group, which is a very thriving support group, which I'm extremely delighted that we've got now. And those are people at all levels of seniority. We've got silks, we've got students, we've got everyone in between, with a wide range of lived experience of different mental illness, but all of whom are finding ways to practice as barristers or to study for the bar, and fighting often for reasonable adjustments to be made that will support them to practice and to bring their talents and their strengths to the bar. And I think that's what we're starting to show, is that having a lived experience of mental illness isn't necessarily a barrier to being a successful barrister. It might mean you just have to do the work slightly differently than some others.
Absolutely. And I think previously, we've all been resilient, in inverted commas, if I can put it like that. And if somebody showed a sign of weakness, we thought that was a bad thing and they couldn't do the job. But it's really heartening to see that there are these organisations now available that you can turn to. So Stuart, I want to now turn to you. You've got over 38 years experience as a clerk. You're one of my clerks. You must have dealt with so many unexpected events over the years with the number of barristers that you have in chambers. Can you give us any examples of some of the experiences that you've had to face?
With 250 members of chambers, as you can imagine, the unexpected invariably always occurs, and every day is an excitement. It's interesting, and every day fluctuates like a yo-yo. We've had a number of opportunities or a number of reasons for people unable to attend court, from bereavement, from people being unable to attend because they've gone to the wrong court, as in Newport, Isle of Wight, and Newport, Wales is an interesting dynamic where you have to explain to the parties involved there's been a slight technical hiccup. We've had people hospitalised, we've had individuals that have effectively been ill, or I've had one indication where one barrister fell off a fence. We had a situation where a dog was taken for a walk in the morning and broke its leg and needed emergency surgery. So having to explain to somebody why they were unable to go to court was quite interesting.
I want to give you a scenario. So one of those examples arises, but I know from my perspective, a barrister calls you up, and it's happened to me. My father had a stroke, and that stress that, Steve was referring to, that worry, anxiety that you have. And I had lots of cases in my diary. I had back-to-back trials. How do you manage that? A barrister calls you up. What do you do?
The first stage is you've got to install confidence with the barrister. You've got to understand the position, you've got to understand what you can and can't do, and you need to try to get as much information as possible in a concise time. There may be stuff they are able to disclose, there may be stuff they don't want to disclose, but you've got to be in a position where you can provide support but also take control. They're obviously going to have other things on their mind which they need to address, and they need to be able to focus on that. You need to help to install confidence that this is being dealt with and that it's being managed on their behalf. You obviously need to clarify what your solicitor's instructions are. You need to know what you can do, but you need to make sure that you notify everybody as to what can and can't be dealt with.
And how would you deal with the barrister themselves who's going through all of this?
You'd have to understand the conversation, so it's almost bespoke. You have to understand how the conversation is materialised. You have to try to understand the position they are in and how receptive they are. There is a number of individuals where they may not be able to give you proper instructions, so you tailor the response to that situation. You've got to be able to clarify that you can take the lead and their position will be protected. Ultimately, the work can be looked after, the support mechanism should be in place, and they should feel that they are able to pass on the baton and it be dealt with.
Let's look at it from the other angle. So you now have a returning barrister. So maybe they've been away for a long time or a short time. It could be physical health related, it could be mental health related, or they're grieving a loss. How do you help them to get back into work and return to practice?
It's important that you have a practice development meeting and you assess what they can and what they can't do and what their objectives are. You've got to be open and transparent from both yourself and for their perspective. What they want and what they can achieve may not necessarily be practical. It may be optimistic rather than realistic. You need to come up with a plan that is both effective and realistic for all concerned. It should be something that should be assessed, it should be reviewed regularly. It's not a quick fix. You're looking for a long-term solution and not a quick solution, because a quick solution invariably doesn't work. Depending on the reason for their return or the reason for their absentee, you need to tailor it accordingly. You may need to bring into consideration adjustments They may need to reduce the work they can do. They may have to reduce the areas they can do. All of those things should be done with open dialogue, and it should be done in a manner where you come up with a plan together, and then you come up with a timetable to review it as to does it work, and does it work for both the individuals. There's no point promising the world when it's not possible, but the same instance is it's coming up with a controlled plan and how it can be implemented.
Do you see differences between someone who may be doing a civil practice and is largely paperwork and somebody who might be in the Crown Court all the time? Because obviously within Chambers there are going to be barristers with such a variety and diversity of practices. I mean, how do you tailor one to the other? What are the difficulties or the challenges?
Practices are so varied, and so somebody that's involved in lengthy criminal trials trying to return to work is problematical because that needs control, and that may not even be possible. You may need small incremental steps, doing smaller cases to just build up the confidence, but also just getting back into the feel of it. A paperwork practice can be easier, but it also can be harder because you're in isolation. Once again, it depends on what the individual needs. Some people come back to work because of the camaraderie, the atmosphere within Chambers and the collective nature of it. They want to be able to talk to people, and going and giving a paperwork practice to somebody who's in isolation may not necessarily be the best course for them. So it's trying to tailor it for what they need, but that goes back to the conversation you should have with them.
Sam, I want to turn to you because in your role, you will be aware that Chambers come in all shapes and sizes. And for those who don't feel supported by Chambers or their clerks, and then there's an unexpected turn of events which forces them away from the bar, what advice do you give to those barristers in that situation and how they manage an unexpected event?
First of all, I'd be very sad if you weren't able to work with your clerks and work with your chambers. Certainly the work that we've been doing over the last 10 or so years has been working very, very closely with Chambers and with the Institute of Barristers Clerks around making sure that clerks are skilled and equipped in working with barristers to help them stop practice and to start practice again. So my first port of call and advice would always be to engage with your clerks, because really they are the experts for helping you stop and start. If that isn't possible and isn't a practical option, there are lots of checklists that Bar Council has developed and guidance that you can refer to. I think sometimes in the heat of the moment, if you're having to stop suddenly, then you're not necessarily going to think about all the things that you may need to cover. So we've got guidance on career breaks on our website. There's, of course, the helplines at the Bar Council who can assist. And just talking through the practicalities, what you do with your practicing certificate, what you do with respect to your insurance, your BMIF insurance, what you're going to say to your professional clients, what information you want put on the website about your absence if you're leaving. I think turning to colleagues and to the inns and to the circuits as well, if they don't feel able to go directly to their clerks or they're not getting the support that they want from their clerks. But the main message is there's lots and lots of help out there, and you just need to tap into it and reach out.
What about returning to the bar? Because we can imagine returning barrister, whether it's been weeks or months, or I remember from maternity leave, even after a year, you're so nervous. You feel like you've lost all the cases in your diary. You can't travel as much, possibly because your health may not permit you to be able to do so. You don't know if solicitors remember your name. What support is there for barristers who are trying to get back on their feet?
I think there's a lot of support out there now. Just looking at INA's initiative around the movers and returners work that you're doing and the reason we're doing this podcast today. I'm somebody who loves a list, and I always think it's really helpful if you have a list to just reassure yourself that you're doing all the right things. Talking to a lot of people, I would start with your clerks if you're returning to practice and having a proper practice review and having a plan, putting a plan in place. And clerks will know what they're doing on that basis. There's practice review guides that we have produced as Bar Council with the support of the Institute of Barristers Clerks. So that means clerks can't deny that it's appropriate for them. But it's around planning meaningful targets, marketing support that you can tap into. What you need to do to reskill and to get your confidence back. And it might be that you want to shadow somebody for a while. Just go and sit in court and listen and just familiarise yourself once again. Lots of the specialist bar associations will run conferences and events and lectures, and attending those can be hugely helpful. So I think it's sort of dipping your toe in the water and really building your confidence back up.
And also there are a lot of chambers, or even, like you say, the specialist groups have mentoring schemes as well, don't they? So it's also being aware of what's available, because there'll be somebody else who may have been through that who can support you in the process.
Absolutely. And the incredible thing about the bar is the extent to which members of the profession are willing to reach out and help and mentor and support. It's such an important part of the culture of the bar. And I think it's about having the confidence to ask for help, ask for a buddy if you're going to be away from chambers for a while to kind of keep you in the loop. If you're coming back, seek a mentor, either through your inn or your specialist bar association or a chambers. There are lots of options. And of course, if anybody needs help, they can just call up the Bar Council and we'll be happy to advise or point them in the right direction on various bits of guidance or what to look for in a mentoring relationship. You know, there is mentoring good practice that you need to be aware of. I think one mentor can be very different to another. And I think having real objectives about what you want to get out of a mentoring relationship. If somebody is offering to be a mentor, that they do that job properly and that you're very targeted. You don't have this sort of random arrangement where you're meeting in inappropriate places and you're not really getting the advice that you want. So I think my advice to anybody who's considering returning to the bar is treat your return like a job. Be really systematic about it. Be really focused. Access all the support that you have and that you can get to, and really take it very seriously. Do interview practice. There's heaps of advice out there.
Sam, that's really helpful. I'm going to ask each of you a question now. And Sam, let me start with you, please. If there's one piece of advice that you think is the nugget advice that you would give to barristers who are going through this unexpected event, what would it be?
I would always start with the clerks if that is an option, or your chambers if you're returning to a chambers, because they really are the best placed people to help you rebuild your practice and work with you in rebuilding your practice.
Thank you, Sam. What about you, Stuart? You are the clerk, but I'm not going to let you have that one. What would be your one nugget of advice, please?
The bar is incredibly supportive. They are a great collection of people and they are all pulling together. So I would talk to your friends and your colleagues. Majority of people will have been through this in some shape or form, so use them as a resource. They are there to give you guidance, so go to your friends and colleagues, because that will be your best course of action.
And it's amazing, actually. It's when you have those conversations like Steve has told us today, that's when you realise that there is a shared experience that's going on that we don't always hear about.
I completely agree. The more that you talk to people, the more you get out. And it's amazing that when these moments occur, you'll find that there are so many more people that are in the same position or have had the same experience. And it can be very embracing, because effectively people do learn and they do evolve, and it makes the connection with individuals even greater. We are all pulling together. Everybody wants to succeed, and that's got to be the objective.
And Steve, I started with you, and I'd like to end with you. Having done this on so many occasions, one nugget of advice, I'll let you have more than one if you wish. What would it be?
Don't allow yourself to have too much main character energy. We're all the lead characters in our own life dramas. But there's a very good chance that what's happened to you or happening to you has happened to someone else at the bar before. And there's a very good chance that a thing that feels impossible to you and may well be extremely difficult is something that other people have dealt with and have dealt with in a way that has allowed them to carry on being part of this extraordinary profession. So if you can recognise that you may not be the best placed person to judge what's going on for you or how to deal with it on your own, and take all the support that's available from colleagues, from clerks and from elsewhere, then you're much more likely, in my experience, to be able to come back and thrive. Very few people in this profession actually have a straight line path from pupillage through tenancy to silk to the bench. I would suggest that's the exception, not the rule that people seem to think it must be. Most people's lives are messy, and most people's lives at the bar are difficult and messy. And there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to have additional challenges in your life and still be a successful member of this profession. But it's very difficult if you expect to do that on your own.
It's realising, isn't it, that this profession is a marathon, not a sprint. I think sometimes we're in such a rush to reach those milestones, particularly once you've got tenancy, because you think, well, what's the next thing? That we forget about all those other things that actually make up what is a really fulfilling and successful life other than work.
I completely agree. Most of us will be working until we're 70, at least. And therefore, if you start at the bar in your 20s, you're going to be working in this profession for potentially 40 or 50 years. And when you think about it like that, you do start to get some perspective on how quickly it must be necessary for you to attain certain milestones. One big piece of advice I give to junior colleagues is don't allow yourself to be too financially burdened too early, because the numbers that you can earn in principle in this profession may be quite large in certain areas, but it can often take a long time for the money to come through. Earnings are unpredictable if we're at the self-employed bar, and I appreciate not every barrister is self-employed. But for those of us at the self-employed bar, I found that financial stress was an enormous part of what caused problems for me. And conversely, taking off financial pressure allowed you to take more time and allowed you to engage in the kinds of activities that are going to help you have a sustainable practice over a longer period of time and to thrive.
You've talked about this incredible organisation that you're involved in. Tell our listeners, how can they get in touch with BLEMI?
We're a network of barristers with lived experience of mental illness. The best way for people to join that network would be to email me. So that's steve.broach@39essex.com. And I'll then put people on our email group and, if they wish, on our WhatsApp group as well. And it has been such a thrill seeing barristers of all levels of experience and all areas of practice support each other, in particular on the WhatsApp group. So I would say to anyone who does have that background, it would be fantastic to have you as part of what we're doing.
I want to end by saying a huge thank you to all my guests today and for what they have shared with us. Hearing these real-life experiences is a stark reminder that we are all susceptible to the ups and downs of life, and there are just some things we cannot plan for. However, as Steve's story shows, and the examples provided by Stuart, if you want to make it work, there is always a way to return to the bar. We hope that this podcast helps you with managing those unexpected events, from moving away from the bar, but ultimately returning in a way that works for you. Goodbye.
You can find a range of helpful information to support practitioners who might be considering, planning or managing a move, return or break in their practice on the Movers and Returners section of the Inner Temple website. You can also find some of the resources mentioned in today's episode within the podcast description. Thanks for listening.